The sikha we were learning is in the sikhas chelik of hey, the first sikha to Parshat Toldos. In Posuk Vayigdulu Hanorim, when it talks there about Yaakov and Esav being born, then it says they grew up. Vahi Esav Ishidei Etzayid. Esav became a person who knows how to hunt. Ish saw the man of the field. And then it goes on that Yaakov was a Ishtam Yeshiv Holim, he sat and learned. Stellt sich Rashi auf die Werte Yedei Atzayid. So Rashi quotes the words from the Pasuk where it says that Esav was Yedei Atzayid. He knows how to hunt. When he's Mefarish, he says, what does it mean? Lotzud v'lerames is ovid b'fiv. He was able to hunt, to capture, and trick his father with his mouth. V'she'ala, he asked his father, Abba, my father, heich ma'asrin es hamelech v'sateben. How do you take off meiser? Meiser means you take off a tenth of your things. How do you take off meiser? From salt and from straw. So his father thought, Shumadagdek b'mitzvahs, he's very careful in mitzvahs. How does this show that he was very careful with mitzvahs? Lena Mefarshim. So the Mefarshim learned, Ados was Esav gefragt wegen Melech und Teven Davke. The reason that Esav asked about salt and hay, straw, why Davke about that, is weil sie seien in den ganzen Potter from Meiser. Ich mit der Rabbonen. Because these are things that you're not obligated to take Meiser off. Normally, there are certain things you have to take off a tenth. There are all kinds of dinim. Some part you give to Leib, you give to poor people, and you take it. All kinds of. There's a din of taking off Meiser. But from salt, you don't have to take off Meiser. From straw, you don't have to take off Meiser. Even mit der Rabbonen. So when he asked, how do you take off Meiser from salt and straw? He wanted to show as it is a zay film bedagde b'mitzvahs. He's so careful with doing the mitzvahs. That he even takes off meiser, gives a tenth of things which are exempt from meiser. By doing that, he says how careful he is in mitzvahs. He's doing more than you're supposed to. That's what Rashi means according to the Mefarshim. But according to that, it's not clear. Had it been a case where Esav actually took off meiser from salt and from straw, that would have shown that he's very careful in mitzvahs. He's taking off meiser from things you don't even have to. But that's not what Rashi says. Rashi says he asked his father, how do we take off meiser from salt and from straw? Asking for it is not blaze as the mitot and you can't. Not only that, by asking such a question, this would not make him look good in the eyes of Yitzchak, because he's just asking, what does that show? But more than that, what would be the opposite. The fact that he asked, how do you take off meiser from salt and teven, shows that he's such an ignoramus, he doesn't know anything. He's an amhoretz, as a veis in hilchas meiser, he doesn't know of hilchas meiser. If he would do something you don't have to, that shows. But he's asking, how do you do with meiser of teven? How do you take off meiser? In other words, he's assuming that you take off meiser from salt and straw, and he wants to know how. That shows he's an amhoretz. If he's asking about meiser from salt and teven, shows he doesn't know the halach of meiser. Noch mehr, the kasha is more. Esav hat sich doch gehodet bei Yitzchak und nicht Basach Jahren von seiner Kindheit und Jugend. Esav was raised in his father's house by Yitzchak. Many years from when he was very, really little small and very young. Und Leib versucht zum sagen, seiner Medagde bei Mitzvahs, and if he's somebody who's really looking to be careful with mitzvahs, as he wanted to show himself, but gewiss noch geguckt für Yitzchak is Mekayim Mitzvah. So for sure, if he wanted to show his Medagde bei Mitzvahs, he definitely looked at Yitzchak, how Yitzchak is Mekayim the Mitzvahs. And sicher gedacht man merken, that Yitzchak geht nicht gemeistert für Melech with heaven. So certainly, if you look what Yitzchak is doing, he certainly saw that Yitzchak did not give meiser from salt and from straw. And wie hat gemeint Uislam bei Yitzchak with the Shail Heich meiser. So how did he think to find grace in the eyes of Yitzchak? By asking, when he saw himself, he was sure, look, if he wanted to be careful, he wanted to do mixes extra, he wanted to show at least he's doing that extra special. He looked at Yitzchak. He saw Yitzchak doesn't do it because Yitzchak didn't do it because you don't have to. So how did he think that by asking about giving meiser from salt and teven, he would find grace in the eyes of Yitzchak? Why would he think that Yitzchak would look at it nice? Because obviously he didn't know how to do the mitzvahs. And he saw that Yitzchak didn't do it and he's still doing it. That's strange. The Tmi is noch größer, the Kasha is even stronger. The Teichel von Pirish Rashi is bei Esav hat gewollt beweisen, Yitzchak, als ist am Bedankte bei Mitzvahs. The contents of this Rashi, how Esav wanted to show Yitzchak that he's a very Medagde bei Mitzvahs, careful in the Mitzvah, steht Zayin Tanchume, Zayin Breshus Rabbi. It says in two Medrashim. Medrash Tanchume, Medrash Breshus Rabbi. In Tanchume steht es mit Ashina Loshen. In Tanchume it says a little different. As Esav hat gefragt Yitzchak, Mahu shetei chayeves b'maiser. That he asked Yitzchak, what is the din? Is it chayev b'maiser? He's asking the din, is it chayev b'maiser? Aber in Breshus Rabbi steht bedemet zum Loshen, was Rashi sagt bepirushei. In Breshus Rabbi it doesn't say that. It says something closer to the way Rashi says it. Heich metakne milche. How do you fix salt? Heich mesakne, how do you fix straw? What does that mean? Was von dem Lotion is mashmer, in Meforshim sagen, this Lotion seems to be saying, as the Meforshim explain, as das was Melech whatever seine Mechuiv Meiser is by Esav Kesofik given. That there was no doubt in Esav's idea, mind, that you should take off Meiser from salt and from straw. So Shaila is not given. Heich Meiser is a Melech v'sateven. How do you take off Meiser? Which is similar to the Medrash in Rabbi where it says, how are you Mesaken? Mesaken is a lotion by taking off Meiser or things like that. In Gemara lotion it's called to be Mesaken the food, to fix the food. So when he's asking, how do you fix the food of salt and Tevin, he's saying, how do you do it? It means, I know you do it, but how do you do it? And that's the way it seems from Medrash Rabbi. In the way it says in Tanchume, it's not asking how you do it. He's asking, do you have to give Meiser or not? Kum tuis, it comes out of Rasha, Kleib tuis, dafke dem Nusach, was is noch magdil. So it comes out of Rasha, the expression Rasha uses is a lotion that makes bigger, number one, the Amaratzas from Esav. It shows even more how Esav was ignorant. As Vayim is border, as Melech Otem is an Chayv Meiser. The way he asked it, how do you do it, means I know you have to do it. So that shows more that in Amhoritz he doesn't know that salt and straw don't need Meiser. And the second thing, it makes stronger them need American as Yitzchak Eina Meiser Melech and Tevin. By saying how do you do it, that means you have to do it. Yitzchak didn't do it. It shows how much he did not even realize that Yitzchak doesn't do it. So two things. It shows how big Amhoritz he was. He didn't know the din. If he's asking, how do you do it? That means for sure you do it. How do you do it? And also it shows that he didn't know what Yitzchak was doing. So that's one kasha. In other words, how does this show that he was medagdik b'mitzvahs? All it shows is a big Amhoritz and he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what he's doing. Eich is nicht verstandig, also not understood. Wie pas bechal zu fragen heich Meiser? How do you ask? How do you take off Meiser from whatever? Jeder weiß den Poshet Teich from Meiser. Everyone knows what Meiser is. Meiser means a tenth. He's involved by State the Shail Heich Meiser. What is this question? How do you take off Meiser? Via say nimmt man Meiser a zentel from Melech. How you take off a tenth from salt and Tevin? Everyone knows. Count 10 and take off 1 and give it Meiser. But what's this question? How you take off Meiser? Meiser means a tenth. Find out, take the thing and give a tenth of it. Give 1 out of 10. In Medrash can man noch verrenten. In Medrash, the way it says in Medrash, he asked, how are you mesaken? How do you fix salt and straw? There you could say, Adishaila, und die Shaila Nalsif Alva. This question that we're asking now, what did he mean, how you do it? Everyone knows how you do it. And another question that we asked before, Vert Bavorden Bedik Loshna Medrash will be answered by the way the Medrash writes it, Heich mesakne milch and tivne. Und nicht heich meisen. How do you fix salt and straw? And not how do you take off meisen? Because if you say his question was, how do you fix it, could have another meaning. According to that, you could say like this. Esav knew that salt and straw are exempt from Meiser. Sein Shaila is up heich mesaken. The Shaila was not how you take off Meiser. The Shaila, how do you fix it? Meaning like this. Since we know that you have to take off from things that grow from your crop, you have to take off Meiser. There's also a din called Meiser Behemah. One of every 10 behemoths has to be given as a korban, etc., etc. The reason for that is to show that the earth and everything in it belongs to Hashem. Darf doch sein etwas an ähnliche Pule verticken, bei die Sachen, was seine Potem für Meiser. So Asa was thinking, he was trying to show that what he's doing is that we know that from salt and straw you don't take off Meiser. So how do you do? So what else do you do to show as by Zeiselman beweisen as they come from the Meibishn. There must be something that you have to show by salt and by Tevin, how you show that this belongs to the Eibishter and everything comes from the Eibishter. So so if you're not Gators, he asked, how do you mice it? He just, how are you masakin? Oh, then it could answer. Und das gewinnt Shailas Esav. That's a question of Esav. Heich masaken in milchativne. How do you fix salt and tevin? That means the azeiz me masaken. How do you fix it? But then you talk about mitzvahs meiser. There's no mitzvahs meiser, but there must be some other way how you show that it belongs to the Eibishter. That was his question. So this also answers the question. We pass go to fragen heich meiserin. Question was, how could you ask heich meiserin? And the question was, what do you mean, yeah, heich meiserin? How you take it? Take 1 out of 10. No, that wasn't his question. He didn't ask, how do you take off meiser? How do you fix? So that's how it's going to the Medrash. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says his question was heich meiser. So the question that we asked before is, and Rashi is bigger. Why did Rashi change from the Medrash? And he wrote heich meiser. Had he stuck to the Lashon of the Medrash, heich mesaknim, it wouldn't be so bad. He was asking a different question. How do you fix it? What do you do? If you don't take off meiser, you must be doing something else. But Rashi Bedafke doesn't do it. Rashi writes, his question was, how do you take off meiser? So we're back to the question before. How do you take off meiser? 1 out of 10 is what you take off meiser. And also the other question, didn't he know that you don't take off meiser from these things? Didn't he see it by Yitzchak? And if he didn't know, then that shows he's a Lamhoretz. That's all. The Shleimer the beer in them, the Rebbe says that the pshat is like this. But Shingret kam upon him. I said many times, as Rashi is mefarish pshuto shemikra. Leibosia le pshuto shemikra. Rashi explains everything according to the simple words of the posik, of the pshat of the posik. As he writes himself, I only came with my commentary to simple pshat of the posik. Even if it doesn't fit to the halachas. The derech pshat is a different derech. Rashi goes according to the derech pshat. Well, so that applies to us also. This is what Rashi says, that he asked, how do you take off meiser from salt and straw? Is not verbunden with the mitzvah for meiser zroim shlach matan teira. It's not connected to the mitzvah that after matan teira there's a mitzvah of taking off meiser from things that grow from your crop. No, mit mitzvahs meiser was hat gedemelt negemeldet mit pshuto shemikra. He's talking about the mitzvah of meiser the way it was fulfilled at that time before matan teira. And according to the simple pshat. According to the simple pshat, the meiser that the Torah is talking about is not the regular meiser that you take off from the crop. What kind of meiser is it? So Rebbe explains. Frier in Parshalech, already earlier in Parshalech, it says, because whatever we're going to talk about Rashi, we have to assume that whatever Rashi wrote, the one that's learning the Rashi now remembers it. Anything that's written later, if Rashi would refer to that, he would have to tell you. But here, it's something that happened, it says before, in Parshalech, which is earlier, it says, but after he won the war against the 4 kings, so the Pasuk says, that Malki Tzedek was the king of Sholem, he was a Kain, he gave him Meiser from everything, and Rasha is Mefared. Rasha said, who gave to who? Avram gave to Malki Tzedek Meiser Mikol Ashalei. Bishoy Kain. Rasha, because Malki Tzedek, who Shem was a Kain, so Avram gave him Meiser from everything. From everything. Not only from the things from the war. Everything he owned. That comes out as like this. Avram gave Meiser to Malki Tzedek, show you Kain. First of all, Avram gave Meiser to Malki Tzedek, number 1. Number 2, he gave Mikol Ashalei. He gave everything that he owned. From everything he owned, he gave 10th. Mefarshim say, at the meat meant Rasha Shelo Zayin Dem Pirish, that by saying he gave everything from everything that's his, Rasha comes to be Shelo, to go against the common, those that hold, as the Meiser was Avram, and he gave him his blaze given from Shalal Muhammad. The Meiser Avram gave was from the loot of the war. This is after the war, so they got all the loot. So some Mefarshim learn that when the Pasuk says he gave Meiser from the loot. But Dosim Mefurish B'Mikra Bazundes, the Rebbe says Rashi doesn't learn like that. That's separate in the Torah. With the Pasuk that gleich Mamshe, the Pasuk continues, says Avram had gesagt, im Chut v'mekech mekal hashaloch. Avram said clearly, from a thread, from a shoelace I won't take from you. As er had gone genommen from the Shlom's Daim. He did not take anything from the loot of Daim. So what was the Meiser that he was giving? But the Meiser he given the Kol Asher Loi from his own things. He gave Meiser from everything he owned. That's what that says in the tape. Zetman, from here we see, as Avram had sich given to get Meiser from Kol Asher Loi. The Avram, what his minig was, what he did was, he gave Meiser from everything that he, Avram, owned. From the Allah Zion Lechosin, from all his possessions. Came a foolish free, like it says clear before. What did he have? Saying cattle and avodim and slaves and kesef of gold and silver. So Avram gave Meiser from everything. Another thing, since the Torah says that Hashem said, Avram, whatever he's doing good, he will command his children and his family later to follow the derech of Hashem, to do tzedakah and mishpat. Since Avram did that, is mutin, we understand that and Yitzchak also behaved that way. And he gave Meiser not for seine Tvua, and he gave Meiser not only from his crop that grew, which that is true also. Rasha brings weiter from Posuk. Rasha says later on the Posuk that he planted and he found 100 times more than he expected. So he gave Meiser from that too, the Torah says. But we're saying for sure he gave, like Avram, Meiser Mikol Ashalei, everything of the old. And the Rebbe says, the Rebbe in order 23 says that Yaakov did the same. Yaakov said, Pasha Vayetzi, he doesn't bring it because that's later, but the fact is that it said, V'kol Ashatitani Asar Asreneloch. Said to the Eibishter, whatever you'll give me, I'll give you Meiser. So we see the concept of Meiser at that time was Meiser from everything that you have to give a tenth. The Rebbe says you could add, this is according to not only Pshat, according to any other way we learn, other drochim, other style we learn Torah. Avram at Mekayim given Kol Torah Kula. Avram did the whole Torah, even though it wasn't given. And if he did the whole Torah, Kelelech Mitzvah Tzedakah Al Kaponim, Meiser Ma'akeren. So for sure he gave, besides what it says in the Torah that he gave Meiser to him, he definitely did Meiser Tzedakah. He gave Meiser, and Tzedakah you should give a tenth from the principle. When Yitzav is born of last tzedakah, and he commanded his children to do the same tzedakah. So for sure Yitzchak also gave Meiser of all his possessions. That's called Meiser of tzedakah, Meiser ksofim, Meiser of money. So now we'll understand very simply. Now we'll understand when they tried to impress his father. So what he meant with the question, when he asked, how do you take of Meiser from salt and from straw? What he meant was, we said before, from salt and from straw, you don't have to take of Meiser. For sure, he saw that Yitzchak didn't do it. Now we're saying a new thing. According to Pshuta Shemikra, Yitzchak did do it. Because at that time, according to Pshuta, he gave Meiser from everything. So he gave Meiser from salt. He gave Meiser from Tevel. Because for sure Yitzchak also gave Meiser from everything. So then what was his question? So that question, we said before, he didn't know that Yitzchak didn't give Meiser. No, Yitzchak did give Meiser. So what's his question? And we said before, how could you ask how you give a Meiser? Take 1 out of 10, and that's Meiser. The Shaila for Neisim is blaze given Heich Meiser Mechula. How you take of Meiser? As I will explain, that this is a different question. What's the question? The Tzad HaShova from Melech und Teven, the similarity, the common denominator of salt and straw, in which way they're different than all other types of things, is like this. They have something in common. Themselves, they don't have a big importance. How expensive is salt? How expensive is straw? But if you mix it with other things, there's a benefit you get from salt or from straw, much more than the benefit you get from the salt, the value of the salt itself. What does that mean? We see that actually, a little amount of salt. A little bit of salt. How much does it cost? A little bit of salt on its own, it has very small value, very small importance. That little bit puts in a taste in the dish that you do, in the food that you eat. It makes them better. it makes it better. Now, much more than the value of the salt, the little bit of salt that you have. Nicht nur Aisof Estam, and not only that it adds taste, makes it better, or Beifanas on the melech felt becholas achilas amaychel. In a way that if you're missing the salt, then your whole food is nothing. Like the Pasuk says, tefel beli belach. Can you eat? Can you eat food without salt? You can't even eat it. So a little bit of salt changes the whole food. There's a tevin, the same thing with straw. Straw itself, what can you do with straw? Michael behemi, you give it to eat of an animal, or the lasoke betanukets, or you heat it up in the oven. So the straw itself, hotevin, gor vein shovek kesef b'chshivas. That's very small amount of money it's worth, and very small importance. But if you use it to make bricks, to build, then it's worth much more. This was the question of Esav. Not if you have to give up Meiser. Yes, you have to. You saw Yisrael do it because you have to give Meiser from everything according to Pshat in those days. His question is how you do it. You could calculate the value in two ways. Like dem Meiser but nitten didan. This type of Meiser, the one we're talking about, which is not the Meiser that you take off from your crop, like later on. The Meiser was Vayitin the Meiser Mikoil Ashel Yilei. And you gave Meiser from everything that you have. Was is Lechumere von Alts was mefarmokt, which you have to be machmer and give from everything you own. He's Lechumere Mokem Leimer. There's a place to say, you don't calculate the Meiser of the straw and of the salt according to the amount that you have, the weight that you have, the numbers that you have, the way it's now. Like by Meiser Behemoth, you go according to how much you have, and that's what you give. Maybe you count the value as it'll be worth when you will actually use it. Which means like this. In order 32, the Rebbe explains. If we'll be talking about taking off Meiser, regular Meiser, 1 out of 10, then there's no shayla. Who cares? You have salt. Who cares what value it's going to have when you're going to mix it with something else? Now you have a pound of salt, take off 1/10 of a pound and put it down. No matter what, and who cares that now it's worth so much, and if you mix it, it'll be worth more. The word here is what the Meiser that we're talking about that you give from everything. It's not that every little thing you give, take off Meiser from that. It means you evaluate all your possessions, see how much it's worth, and that, let's say, if you come out it's worth $1,000, you give $100 for Meiser. So here you're not giving Meiser from every little bit. I'll read the Loshen in the Sicha. When you take Meiser, this type of Meiser from everything, you don't take off from everything separately. You take off 1/10 of the value of all your property. So here you have this question. The question is, do we take it? How do we evaluate it? So when we evaluate the whole property, we're not taking off a little bit of salt, 1/10 of the group of salt or 1/10 of the straw. We evaluate our whole property, whole possessions, and we see how much is it worth, and 1/10 of it we give away to Meiser. So how do you evaluate? Since here by straw and by salt, it has its own value as a thing for itself, and then it has a much bigger value when it's mixed with food or mixed with making bricks. Und the Baldazeh, if so, wer die Scheile by Melech Vateven. So now you have a question by the salt and the straw. Wie rechet man sie Shavias? How do you count their value? Sie legt sie Wert für sich jetzt. Is it according to their value now? Or the legt sie Shavias base, man nutzt sie als Tarufes von nächsten Time, or the value when you will use it to mix into other things. And I would just think to myself, how do you evaluate? If you sell a piece of meat, and the piece of meat is worth $10. If it's not salty, it's worth $9. So even though the salt, a little bit of salt that you put in is only worth $1, but when you evaluate it, the meat is worth with $10 with $9 more because you mixed it in. So now it means that the salt has a bigger value. So that's the question. So the question he had, how do you evaluate it? Do you evaluate it according to each piece, how much it's worth on its own? Or do you evaluate it based on it being mixed in to other things, and it raises the value from the other thing? The salt itself has a bigger value because it makes that you have more property. How do you evaluate it? In order 34, the Rebbe says, there are other things also that if you have it, it's one thing, one value, and if it's mixed with other things, it makes other things more important. But you could have the same question that you have by salt and by straw, like you have by the other things. So he says, there it's not a shaila. Because there for sure, anything that you have, you look at it the way it's now. Comes to salt and straw and hay, their whole importance is the fact that you could mix them into others. Other things are good. If you mix it makes it even more kosher, but it has a value on its own because it's made for its own reason also. But things like these two, they're lechatchila made for the purpose of mixing, and then it gets a bigger value. So the shaila is, how do you do it? This will explain why Rashi writes the Loshen that his father thought medagdik b'mitzvahs. He's medagdik mitzvahs. As in mekayim the mitzvahs kedekunam, that means medagdik means that you mekayim the mitzvahs properly. With ingressen digduk b'cheshbon, and you calculate it. The word digduk is, when it comes to making a cheshbon, you calculate things. You have to be medagdik b'cheshbon. So Rashi used the word digduk. So why? Because this tells you that he was trying to show that he's calculating properly. How do you calculate it? According to the other Meforshim, that said that what do you want to do? He wants to show his father that he's taking off meiser from things that are not obligated. What mer masim given the losh machmer b'mitzvahs. It would fit more if Rashi would say he wanted to show that he's machmer in mitzvahs, mahader b'mitzvahs, or other losh. Medagdik b'mitzvahs fits more to calculation, and that fits to the Rebbe's pshat. So that's how the Rebbe explained to Rashi. From the Yonim of Floim al derech halacha in the Pirish Rashi, the Rebbe says that in many Rashis we find things that are connected to halacha, to nigla. So we'll see it here too. With the mon frier, as a medesh is the lotion heich mesaknin, the Rashi is of teich masrin. The medesh uses the lotion. How are you mesakin? His question was, how do you fix salt and straw? Rashi's lotion is, how do you meiser these two? The shleimar, the shinal hashenis is totally in the pluktis visharamba marayvet. So you can say these two for the expressions depend on an argument between the Rambam and the Rayvet. Milchas Melochem read the Rambam when the mitzvahs was given Kedem Matan Torah. Milchas Melochem, the Rambam talks about those mitzvahs that were there before the Torah was given. This is what the Rambam says. Ashish advarim nitztav Adam Rishon chulu. Adam Rishon was given 6 mitzvahs. Bo Avram and nitztav, Avram came, he got another mitzvah, V'hu yispal shachris. And he also was the first one to daven shachris. Yitzchak hifrish meiser. Yitzchak started off the union of meiser, took off meiser. So the Rayvet, says, really, it's not Yitzchak who started meiser. Avram started meiser. Because we find that he gave meiser. So why does the Rambam say that's the Rayvet's kasha on the Rambam? So the Rambam holds meiser started by Yitzchak, and the Rayvet holds the Rayvet started by Avram. Let him Meforshim, and Meforshim learn that the Rambam Rayvet and Mechulik and the Pirish Mahitam the meiser Mekel v'shit b'Avram. Their argument is dependent on what it means when it says that Avram gave him to Malki Tzedek meiser from everything. Later, Rambam is ever eaten the meiser not given and get it from the Rosh's meiser we meiser mitzvahs meiser lach matan Torah. According to the Rambam, that was a separate thing. That wasn't the same mitzvah of meiser after matan Torah. Because when the Rambam says that the Eibishter gave the mitzvahs before, the few mitzvahs, that means he gave a few mitzvahs that really are part of the mitzvahs later. He already started giving before. So the Rambam said, Avram is not the one that started with meiser. It says he gave meiser. That's not the same meiser that's going to be given to the Yidden by matan Torah. Because meiser only applies things that grow from the ground. And if he gave meiser from everything, obviously that's not the meiser that we know from matan Torah. So that's given belay meiser from the shlal shabbat. The Meforshim say it was meiser from the loot that he got. But the Ragachover is mevayer, the Ragachover explains, as the Shittas Rambam is the meiser given bedugmas mitzvahs trumas ameches, that this, according to the Rambam, the meiser that Avram gave, it was from the loot, like we find the things that had to be given by the Shevi Malkeach was Midian. We look at Parshas Matos when they had the war with Midian, fought with Midian, had the war with Midian, and they brought a lot of loot. and there was a certain amount that had to be given to the Eden, had to be given to the Mishka, whatever, a whole bunch of things. And that was a one-time thing, but the Sharva says that what Avraham did, according to the Rambam, is the same thing. Was the mitzvah is not neagzlated. That's not a mitzvah. This whole mitzvah of giving from the loot, all the things there, it was said by Mechemes Midian, but it's not ladeira. So it's saying by Avraham, that's not one of the mitzvahs that was given to Avraham, which is the beginning of the mitzvahs from later. Sheikh and Ravid is going to get it from mitzvahs Meiser. According to the Ravid, when Avraham gave Meiser, yes, that was the mitzvah of Meiser. And B'meila, if that was the mitzvah of Meiser, so the mitzvah of Meiser given earlier was already given to Avraham because he started it. Now, how we're going to answer, according to the Ravid, how could you say that that's what Avraham did? Was the same Meiser as we have later, but we have Meiser later, there's only things that grow from the ground. So the Rebbe says, Yeshleimer, one answer we could give. The Meiser that Avraham gave was the same idea as the Meiser from later. But this detail, that it's only from things that grow, that was added after Matan Torah. Mashenke der Meiser from far Matan Torah given by alle Sachen, on Yitzim and Aklal. But the same type of Meiser that was before Matan Torah was from everything, no exceptions. Like it says in Posig, Mikhail, from everything. By the other mitzvahs, we find similar that there were other mitzvahs that the Ovis did. As they were doing the mitzvahs like after Matan Torah. Avram did all the mitzvahs that Eibishter gave to the Eden. But nevertheless, when he did those mitzvahs, not everything was done with all the details, as we have it after Matan Torah. For instance, Ahora 44, the Rebbe says, mitzvahs milah. Avram, but we know that mitzvahs milah has two parts, milah or priya. There's one skin that you cut and one skin that you tear. By Avram, it wasn't. Avram only did milah. After Matan Torah, you might do both. And the din is, if you did milah and you didn't do priya, you only cut the skin, the thicker, the outer skin, and you didn't tear the other skin, kila leimol. You're not yaitz of the mitzvah of milah. And nevertheless, by Avram, it was not, even though the milah of Avram is already similar to the milah of later. We know yibum is if a person dies and has a brother and never didn't leave children, so the brother is miyabim. The brother should marry her. If he doesn't marry, he gives chalitza. That before Matan Torah was his dem will give in, then the Ramban says, the way that quotes in order 45, that before Matan Torah you could do even not dafke a brother of the husband who died. Could be al of the brother, of the father, other relatives. So it was the same mitzvahs even, but it's with different details. So Mela that Ravid will learn that what Avram did was the mitzvah of Meiser, started mitzvahs of later. There was one detail different because that itself changed after Matan Torah. And the second svara, Meiser of Avram is going to derech Meiser Ksofim. The Meiser of Avram was like after Matan Torah. It's only gedule kark, only things that grow. But there is a union of Meiser, not of things that grow. That's called Meiser Ksofim, Meiser of money. There's an argument, this din of Meiser you should give from your money is a din deraisa, din derabanan. So the Rebbe says, even if it's din derabanan, still Avram did it, because we know that it says in the post of Vayishma, David says Avram is keeping my Torah, and Rashi says that it means, or the Meforshim say it from Chazal, that it means he did even mitzvahs derabanan. He says verbunden mit und hat for mitzvahs meiser, but even if it's only mit derabanan, it's nevertheless an extension, a result of the mitzvahs meiser that was given later. So even if you hold that mitzvahs meiser from chumash and b'deraisa is only from things that grow, and meiser ksofim is the rabbanon. So first of all, the rabbanon he did also, but besides that, it's still a connection to that meiser. The far learned there Sifri, Aruis Meiser Ksofim for Posik Aset Aset. In Sifri, where does he learn now that you should give Meiser from money? From the Posik Aset Aset, which is written by Meiser of growth. On the Ribber is Mitzvahs Meiser, and Algemei Misyachas of Yitim Le Meiser Avram. Therefore, according to the Ravid, all types of Meiser is connected to Avram. That's why he says Meiser started by Avram. So we have this Machlekes, the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam holds that the Meiser of Avram was not the regular Meiser, and the Ravid holds it was the regular Meiser. So we could say, so now we could say the argument between Medrash and Rashi. Rashi says he asked, how do you take off Meiser? The Medrash says he didn't say, how do you take off Meiser? How are you Mesaken, Teven and Melach? Now we'll see it's connected to Machlekes Rambam and the Ravid. The Dasa Medrash is Vayit and the Meiser Mekel need given together for Mitzvahs Meiser. The Medrash learns like the Rambam. It fits to the Rambam. that when we said before, according to the Rambam, when it says he gave Meiser from everything, that's not the Meiser of later. It's a different type of Meiser. It's not the mitzvah's Meiser. And the Medrash learns like that. The Balda mitzvah's Meiser is not from Gedula Karka, since mitzvah's Meiser is only from things that grow. Hot nit kem ort, the Shaila hech Meiser nes HaMelech. So the Medrash couldn't say that his question was, how do you take off Meiser from salt? There was no mitzvah Meiser here then. No, not there was no, I'm sorry. It's since the Meiser that time was the regular Meiser. It's not the regular Meiser. So if it's not the regular Meiser, so what's the question? How do you take off Meiser from salt? Why not? It's not the regular Meiser, so you take off Meiser like you regular normally take off Meiser. What's the question? The Farzog the Medesh at the Shaila from Nesev is given Haich Misak the Milchem Tivna. So since there can be the Shaila was how do you take off Meiser? Because the Meiser, according to the Medesh, was like the Ravid learns, it wasn't the regular Meiser. So you had to take off Meiser from everything. So why would he have a question about taking off Meiser from salt? Why not? It's part of everything. It's a different type of Meiser, not a Meiser of later on. So what was this question? Not how you take off the Meiser, whether you should take off the Meiser. Sure, you take off Meiser from salt, because you take off Meiser from everything, according if it's not the real Meiser from later. So what was this question? Like we said before, how are you masaking it? But it means, like we said before, how do you fix it? What do you mean how you fix it? Didn't mean to how do you take off. Since it's, and as he said before, Sibes, what do you do to show? This part, Canal Sibes, is not clear. So let's just say, but his question was, Haich Misakne. Rasha learned Tober, Canal Siv Gimel. Rasha learns, as Vahitin Meiser, Mekel, and I get it from Mitzvah's Meiser. So when Avram took off Meiser, that was the regular Meiser. And Vival, their Meiser is Mekel, since it's from everything. The Riber is Masim, the Shaila, Haich Meiser, as a Melech, as a Teven. Therefore, you could ask the Shaila, since you have to take off Meiser from everything, so you could ask a Shaila, like we said before. How do you calculate the union of the Meiser from salt? And this is the difference between the Medrash. The Medrash learns, like the Rabbi, that it's not Meiser, it's only from Gedula Karka. So you can't ask, how do you take off Meiser? It's not the Geder of Mitzvah's Meiser. So how do you say, B'chlal, I'm just trying to kvetch around the words. How do you take off Meiser from salt when there is no din Meiser? You could ask how you fix it. But Rasha learns that this was a regular Meiser, so he could ask the Shaila, how do you do it? You'd have to take off a regular Meiser, so he could use the lotion. How do you take off Meiser? Again, I'm not explaining it so clear. It's not so clear. From the Chassidus that's in this Rasha. The Chura is noch nicht glatt. It's still not clear. For was hat Eisa gefragt, darf ich benegede zwei Sachen von Melech und Tefen? Why did he ask only about these two things, salt and straw? Sicher I do andere Sachen mit derselbe Tchuna anal. You have other things which have the same concept, like the Rebbe says in the order, like spices. As wenn sie werden benutzt und Aruvis mit anderen Minim, bekommen sie Chshivas Gdele. If they're used with other things, they become more important, more valuable. If you add sich Chshivas Mitzvah, compared to how much they're worth on their own. Is a beer pnimi in them, so the Rebbe is al Pichsidis, the Pshat is like this. Al Rebbe fragt in Teire, Al Rebbe is a Shada. V'bala Yitzchak had gewusst, as in Shem Shemaim Shogeg b'fiv shel Esav. Since Yitzchak knew that Esav doesn't talk about Eibishter, like Rashi says. Wie Sheiches zu sagen, als Esav war immer amei, b'shayla sich meißen es ateven. So how did Esav trick his father by asking the questions, how you take off meißen? He knew that he's not the way, that he doesn't talk about Eibish, he's not connected, he's not doing the right thing. When they answered, the Rebbe answers, as Esav is mulamato, this that he didn't talk about Eibishter and he wasn't behaving properly. That's only the way it was down here. And the way it was by him. Aber Esav is ein Sherish, welcher is Maki Volvamaila, but Esav, the way it's the root, which is Maki, which is on top of it, but that's the source of Esav, is a Heiche Madrege English. Esav represents a very high Madrege in holiness. Reisha de Esav bit for the Yitzchak, it says the head of Esav is in the lap of Yitzchak. The head of Esav rolled when they killed him by the Maras Machpelah when he didn't want to let bury Yaakov. So Don cut off his head and the head rolled into the lap of Yitzchak. So Chassidus says, what does it mean? The head of Esav, the Sherish von Esav, the root of Esav, the source of Esav, which is Esav is Gvura. Esav, the son of Yitzchak. So he's Gvura, but it's Gvura the Klippe. He's from Yitzchak, Gvura the Gdusha. His Gvura comes from Yitzchak. And because from the root, Esav is a very high madrege. It comes down here, it comes into Klippe. But it comes from a shadish of Yitzchak, of Gvura. So mitzad the higher madrege, which he calls Makiv, Esav asks, how do you take a meiser? And it sounds like it's a good thing. In other words, Yitzchak looked at him the way he's in the shadish. And that's why, as much as he knew that he's not talking about Eibishter, but that's down here. But in shadish, Esav asks things which Yitzchak thought shows that he's great, because in Shadish is great. The father Yitzchak gewollt geben the brachas to Esav, and that's why Yitzchak wanted to give the brachas to Esav. Weil durch dem hat gewollt mamshel sein im Shadish von Esav in Dolamato. By giving the brachas, he wanted to bring down the root of Esav, was durch dem wollte das Yitzchak Esav is bar gewesen. So according to what Yitzchak thought, he would give him the brachas, and it would bring down the way it's in the source and would change him down here. And he would get his body but purified. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says. You could say that Thomas says this will explain why he chose Dafke to use the example of salt and straw. Salt and straw is a hint to the purification and the elevation of Esav. It says that Melech is a sherish kol Gvuras. Salt is the source of all Gvuras. Gvuras is strictness. Gvuras is not sweetness. Salt is bitter, the source of all Gvuras. And the fire is Melech Mam Tekdinim. And that's why, in order to make things sweet and tasty, you use salt. Because in order to sweeten the Gvuras, you have to go to the sherish. And since salt is the sherish of all Gvuras, so the salt could sweeten the food. As in the meaning for Masin and Samelech is Merumas the period from Gvuras Desav. It comes out that in this question, how do you take off Meiser from salt? You talk about salt, that's a hint to the purification of the Gvuras of Esav, because salt is what causes the purification of things which are Gvura, not good Gvura. And that's connected to Esav. Well, there is a Masin and Sateven, when you ask the question, how do you take off Meiser from straw? It says Chassidus that the straw, which is only the back part of the wheat, that's the level of klippe. And in Hora 62, the Rabbi says, klippe really means the shell. So klippe of a food, so straw is also the shell of the wheat. So that represents klippe. And the far is Esav, is hoyim asiti the klippe. Esav, that was from the klippe side. So he praised himself that he gave Meiser from straw, because straw represents klippe, and he wanted to praise himself. But he gives Meiser from things which represent him, the klippe. The Pash state by Biru from Esav, and that's why it says when the Mashiach will come and Esav will become purified. It says Beis Yankev Eisha Beis Esav Lahava Beis Esav Lakash. Yaakov will be like fire, Esav will be like flame, and Esav will be like straw, because straw represents Esav, as we said. And Ken Yeh made to be a main of Mamesh, the BS Mashiach said, that's how it should be. Very soon in our days, when Mashiach will come.